Welcome to Rev Reads. I am Shawn Wilson, and normally you're looking at book reviews from me, and we have another author interview, though, today, and one that I am really excited about. I recently read his new book, Erased, Not Spelled How It Sound, and we'll talk a little bit about that title that I love in a few moments, but we are pleased to have Pastor John Amanchukwu with us today. So thank you so much, Pastor John, for coming on and talking to us about your book.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Amanchukwu means I know God, and I'm blessed to say that at the age of 19, I gave my life to Christ.
Oh, I like the meaning of that name. Now I'm slightly jealous now, because I'm sure that my last name just means at one point in my history, my ancestors or wrote wills or something like that. But I got nothing special with that. So, but no, what a great name. So, no, pleased to hear that. So, but we're here to talk about his book Erased. It's a book on abortion and critical race theory, and about how the two of those are very intimately linked together. And in my review of it, I talked about just how much I enjoyed it. I thought it was a well written book. It was something that is needed for our churches and for our pastors. It's something that's good for, I think, both those who are in pastoral ministry and also those who are in the laity and regular members of a church, just to know about how these two go together so intimately and why one props up the other. But a lot of people would say, John, that a book on abortion or critical race theory, if you're going to write one of those, you should probably be a doctor to talk about abortion, or you should be a lawyer to talk about critical race theory. So, what gave you the standing to be able to write on these two issues?
But first and foremost, the qualifications for writing a book shouldn't be trumped up in being a doctor or a lawyer. Um, Karl Marx was a doctor, but we saw what we got from him through the Communist Manifesto. Margaret Sanger was a renowned nurse, but she's also the propagator of Planned Parenthood, which has killed over 65 million babies. Dr. Kermit Gosnell, when they raided his clinic, they found dead babies in his clinic. And when we've all learned from Dr. Fauci that being a doctor isn't the most pivotal thing in society. However, I'm a pastor, I'm a watchman, and watchmen are called to watch and warn. The role of the pastor is to expose the truth of God's word, make sure people have a clear biblical worldview, and to give them the realities of the coming judgment that Jesus Christ shall bring upon this nation and this world. And so I think today more than ever, we need pastors involved writing books and addressing these issues. We can't allow our members to receive their feedback and information from CNN and from MSNBC and all of these woke media outlets. We need pastors getting in the trenches and dealing with the hard topics and issues like critical race theory and abortion.
Amen. No, I love that answer. I mean, one of the reasons that I started this book review channel is that I want to come behind and help prop up, men like you and what you're doing. Like, it's one thing to write the book, which we need, but we need other people to let people to know about the books that have been written. And so I'm trying to fill that gap to let people know about what you're doing. So I love that the Watchman answer. That was great. And the thing that got me to read your book in particular, I got to say, was the title. When I first saw it, like I first saw it a couple of times on the, coming soon list on Salem Books, and I just thought it said erased, like, how it's normally spelled, and with Erased, and I didn't even think much of it. And then once I realized how it was spelled, I was like, oh, that's creative. I like that. So I was like, I got to read that book. So tell me about how you came up with the title, and what this title, Erased, spelled Eraced, means to you.
Well, Erased is a movement that loves life of every race and color and sees all mankind, born and unborn, as one blood and equally valuable. During the summer of 2020, I was at one of the busiest abortion clinics in the Southeast. And we all know what happened during the summer of 2020. George Floyd died. And there was a lot of propaganda being pushed. The DEI industry ballooned to $3.4 billion after the death of George Floyd. And while being at this abortion clinic, that our church had been working at for the past 10 years, trying to save babies. We've thrown countless baby showers and supported mothers. We support life from the womb to the tomb. I was approached by a father who walked up wearing a BLM shirt, and he said to me, "Why are you out here fighting a white man's issue?" Now, I was perplexed when he said that, because on that Saturday morning, 70% out of the people outside of the abortion clinic were white, trying to save the babies. And nearly 80% of the moms in the abortion clinic on that Saturday were black, including this gentleman's girlfriend. But he's going to come and accost me and tell me that I'm fighting a white man's issue. Now, if I were to ask him in that moment what was the definition of critical race theory, he probably wouldn't tell me. He probably wouldn't know. But he was a walking poster child for CRT, because in CRT, they see racism in all things and at all times, even when it's a black man trying to save babies of any color or ethnic background down at an abortion clinic. And so from there, God gave me this vision of tying together critical race theory and abortion. He brought to light Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, where the Bible says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Today, we're calling critical race theory good, but it's really evil. Today, we're calling the abortion industry good, or a woman's right to choose good, but it's really evil. So that's where I got the title of the book from, and the framework of this book.
So you mentioned critical race theory is kind of everywhere, and it's what influenced this guy to come up and approach you. But a lot of people would say that, well, I mean, come on, Pastor John, you're not a lawyer. You don't even know what critical race theory is. So how would you give us a basic definition of what critical race theory, or CRT, is?
Well, the simplest definition that I can give you is that critical race theory is racism. We'll just pause there. All
Yeah.
right. Selah. We will pause and think about it. Critical race theory is racism, but it's also a framework used to assess power structures with the intent of redistributing wealth and power dynamics. Now, at one point, it was taught in colleges as a legal tool, but it has matriculated to preschools, to elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. We find it hidden within diversity, equity, and inclusion offices. I'm going to a school board in Wake County to speak today to talk about their equity office. They have spent $8.6 million at this equity office over the past 10 years, while at the same time, 4 out of 10 blacks are proficient in math and reading. So when
Yeah.
you have to say to yourself, we're spending tens of millions of dollars nearly on an equity office, but at the same time, the people that we say that we're supposed to help the most, they're falling further and further behind.
Yeah. No, that's a great definition about the power dynamic. So have you seen that play out in your own life, about how critical race theory works and impacts and influences people?
Well, one thing that you can highlight is this, that critical race theory is an answer to something, but it's a flawed response. In chapter 2 of my book, I addressed the Arkansas Nine and the time frame where blacks were disenfranchised and they were not allowed to go to public schools. At that time, segregation was in place. And so, therefore, one could say, yeah, that was a power structure. At that time frame, there were dynamics that kept blacks from being able to have an equal access to education. However, we're not in that place today. America is not the same country that it once was. And there are people who push the idea of critical race theory with the intent of keeping blacks bound and shackled in the past. And they use us as political tools and they exploit us for political gain. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that the greatest threat to the upward mobility of blacks in America is not critical race theory. You know, it's not the white man with blue eyes and blonde hair, or even bald like you, right? The greatest threat to Black America is fatherlessness.
Yeah.
You know, when you consider during the civil rights movement during that time frame, the 60s, 80% of Black homes had two parents there. But today, 80% of Black homes are led by a single parent. The issue is not critical race theory and or racism. The issue is poor choices and behaviors, and we need to put the focus there.
Yeah, amen. No, no, great answer. Yeah, so it's, it's coming down to our families and our choices, and that's what it is, not those power dynamics. And so we play this now to abortion. So why is abortion then not an issue that's just for people like me? Like I went to a recent pro-life gala in New Orleans, a city that is not, majority white, and probably 85% of the people at the banquet were all white. So why is it not a white man's issue, even if it may look that way at the surface?
Well, the ideology is this, that only a white evangelicals are focused on abortion and blacks shouldn't be, right? The leading
Yeah.
cause of death in our country is not heart disease, tragic accidents, the coronavirus, or cancer. The leading cause of death is abortion. It's the number one moral issue of our day. There are people who say that if I was around during the time of Hitler, I would have done this. I would have put my life in front of the carts as people were hauled off to be burned. And we have our issue today, and the greatest issue that's plaguing us is abortion. So everyone can address this issue. The abortion rate is up in the Black community, is up in the white community. There's something called death rattle. Death rattle sets in nearly 23 hours before a person is going to die. In the Black community, in 1975, we had a 3.6 rate for fertility in the Black community. In order to sustain a people group over 25 years, that number needs to be at 2.1. So in 1975, it was about 3.5, 3.6. But today, that number is about 1.7. And so the Black community is a shrinking and dying community. And we're seeing death rattle right before our eyes. And as we continue to overlook this issue, I'm concerned that by 2038, according to Reverend Clint R. Childress, the Black population will be so small and dire that our influence will be for naught because we are a shrinking people group.
Yeah. No, I mean that's hit the nail right on the head. You could not have said it any better. That
Mm.
illustration of the death rattle was just so powerful. And something else that was sort of powerful that caused me to look at something from a perspective I'd never really seen it before. Like I can't, walk into your skin and live your life. But when you talked about African Americans suffering from Stockholm syndrome,
Yes.
that really opened my eyes. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you mean by that in that chapter on the book.
Well, in 1973, a man by the name of Jan Erik Olsson walked into a Swedish bank. He went in there, acting as if he had a deposit and was going to deposit a check, but really he was in there to rob the bank. He hands over a note and he tells them that there are several things that he wants. He wants $700,000. He wants a getaway vehicle, and he wants his friend Clark Olofsson to be freed from prison to come assist him in this heist. And he also wanted the opportunity to use the hostages as a getaway tool as he left the building. So they gave him everything that he wanted. They gave him the money. They allowed his friend to be released from prison, but they would not allow him to use the people in the bank as hostages as he left out. And a 6-day standoff ensued, but something strange took place in that bank. At one point, one of the ladies who were there in the vault, she got cold, and Jan Erik Olsson took off his coat and wrapped it around her. Another person experienced claustrophobia, and so they allowed them to leave the vault. Over the process of time, everyone in there, they were on first name basis, and they began to develop an affinity for one another. It was as if they were more concerned about remaining at peace in the bank than being fearful for their lives. So you have the captors being kind towards the captives, and the captives overlooking the fact that they have been captured. And what happened was on the sixth day, they sent some smoke alarms in there and smoked them out. And as the people left and they grabbed all of the hostages and got them to safety, the hostages were crying out for the two men who were robbing the bank and holding them as hostages. And they were more concerned for their lives, and they thought that the law enforcement would do them harm. And this mimics where the Black community is today as it relates to our allegiance to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is a party that has abused and misused Blacks for a long time. Lyndon B. Johnson said this. He said that I will have Black Negroes, he used another word, I can't use it here. He said, I'll have Black Negroes voting for the Democratic Party for the next 200 years, when he pushed the Great Society, which was mass welfare. Yeah. Mass welfare with a creative tool of getting the Black father out of the home and replacing him with a $400 check. Yeah. And Blacks are in Stockholm syndrome. We have fallen in love with the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party has done us great harm. While at the same time in 1973, they pass a bill. They say, yeah, women should have a right to choose, and we need to push Roe v. Wade. And so as the Black father was being pushed out of the home, the black woman was going down to the abortion clinic and getting rid of her heritage and posterity.
Yeah. No, yeah. So it's a tragic picture and tragic story of what happened. And it's just been this slow dismantling of the African American community. And I mean, I think the big tragedy of it is, how big could the African American voting bloc be today if they didn't follow, if husbands and wives stayed together, had more kids, and then they didn't abort the ones that they had? I mean, the influence that they could have would probably be remarkable in comparison to what it was today. But the Democrats done a great job keeping them at the size that they are, which is easily controllable.
Hey, and to that point, 20 million Blacks are missing as a result of abortion. Blacks make up 13% of the overall population in the U.S. Black women account for 8%. Black men account for 5%. Of the Black women who are still ovulating, that's nearly 3 to 4% of Black women, but they account for nearly 38 to 40% of the overall abortions. We can't survive those numbers, while at the same time, the NAACP was alarmed when Roe v. Wade was overturned. The NAACP was supposed to be for the advancement of color.
Yeah.
Where are Blacks being killed the most? At abortion clinics. You would think that the NAACP of all groups,
I know,
would be against abortion, but they're not. Why? Because they're no longer about the advancement of colored people. They are for the advancement of queer people. There was a time frame where the NAACP was getting ready to go belly up, and they were going to close down. They hired a gentleman by the name of Ben Jealous. He came in and changed the direction of the NAACP and attached to it the LGBTQ initiative. And now there is a commingling, and they have amalgamated with those ideologies. So the focus is no longer on the advancement of colored people.
No, I didn't even know that last point. Yeah, no, that is no wonder the group slid so far in the direction that they have. Like, it just makes sense then.
Yeah. And under the leadership of, when you consider men like Jesse Jackson, who at one point called abortion black genocide, when it was time for him to run for office, he changed that. When you consider Reverend Al Sharpton, one of the pioneers of the civil rights movement, what does he have to say about that issue? When you bring into play many of our leading Black athletes today, like LeBron James and Michael Jordan, and so on and so forth, what are they saying about the leading cause of death in America, in particular the abortion crisis and the Black community? They are mute and silent.
Yeah.
And these things must change so that we can end abortion and move America in the right direction.
I agree. No, and I thank you so much for speaking out on this issue. Like, I appreciate it so much. Do you have any advice for me, as a white counterpart to you, for how I should approach these issues today in my own ministry and my own community?
Well, in the chapter that deals with the role of the white minister, I talk about the focus and the intent and the need for white ministers to work to improve communication. Then also it's important that they speak up. It's important that you build bridges. It's important that you seek out relationships with Black pastors in your community.
Yeah.
We all have a job to do. We can't sit in our own silos and allow the world to crumble before us and allow people to redefine what race is. We know that we all stem from Adam.
Yeah.
God created us in his image. We're all made in the image of God, regardless of how black you are, regardless of how white you are. That is only pigmentation. According to Paul, he made all of us of one blood. And so we are directly connected and united together. And so, yes, we need the white pastor to foster that communication, go into the Black community, have a lunch with a person who is Black and ask questions. Put your cards on the table. Let them know that, hey, man, there may be an area where I'm ignorant and I don't know
Yeah.
what's going on. And so, hey, I want to tell you before we start this conversation, forgive me if I don't understand something, but I want to ask questions because I want to serve all communities well.
No, that's great advice, and I'm gonna try to put that into practice in my community where I'm at, and reach out just across the line a little bit, and try to make some of those new connections that I haven't quite made, just because somebody's not in my theological circle necessarily with my beliefs doesn't mean that we need to be totally cut off. So no, I appreciate that advice and that calling. Also in the book, you have a chapter on Margaret Sanger,
Mhm.
which is interesting because in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, Planned Parenthood came out and sort of had this denouncing Margaret Sanger party. I actually did a Google search on it after I'd read that chapter in your book. And they did probably like half a dozen things where different chapters of Planned Parenthood came out and actually spoke honestly about Margaret's racist past and history. So, in light of the fact that Planned Parenthood sort of dumped her a couple of years ago, why does she still matter today when we talk about Planned Parenthood and abortion?
Well, it was a facade when Planned Parenthood finally acknowledged the racist intent of Planned Parenthood. They have benefited from their benefactor, Margaret Sanger, and her prestigious and historical abortion clinic in New York. There are more Black babies aborted in New York than are given birth to. And they intentionally sought to remove her name in 2020 because George Floyd died.
Yeah.
And everyone was applying pressure. Pressure was being applied to school systems, to Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 companies, to the athletic industry, and even to abortion clinics. So they finally caved and said, yes, she was racist. In a letter to Dr. Clarence C.J. Gamble, several decades ago, Margaret Sanger wrote a letter and said that she did not want the word to get out, that she wanted to exterminate the Black population, and that she was going to use the Black minister if it ever occurred to any of their more rebellious Negroes. And so Margaret Sanger would look at me today and call me a rebellious Negro, and I'll be a rebellious Negro until the day I die, because I believe that all life is valuable and precious in the sight of God. Planned Parenthood's founder is dead, but her mission is alive. And the federal government gives nearly $600 million of our money to Planned Parenthood every year. And so, yes, we do need to discuss Planned Parenthood. And yes, Planned Parenthood is still viable, and we need to work to defund Planned Parenthood. During the summer of 2020, when everyone was marching with BLM saying defund the police, I was saying, no, we don't need to defund the police. You know, what happened to George Floyd, that's an outlier. We need to defund Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean that's the way to save lives in the community is to get rid of Planned Parenthood, not the police officers. Getting rid of all the police officers is gonna well, I guess what we're seeing in New Orleans. I mean, we're having a recall for our mayor because she did a lot of defunding the police work. They don't have enough police officers in New Orleans, and now after a woman's arm tragically got literally ripped off her body when she got carjacked, they're trying to recall her because there's not enough police on the streets and it's too dangerous. And so they're trying to rescue the city from those type of policies. So yeah, we need to defund Planned Parenthood and not the police.
Yes,
So you talk in the book about how racism is circling back. It is on the upswing, that there are more people who are becoming racist, and it's actually being fed and inflamed by critical race theory. So can you talk a little bit about how critical race theory is not it's not even neutral toward race, but it's actually causing people to be more racist? How does that happen?
Yes, well, I'll share this with you from chapter 2 of my book. In 2021, Columbia University offered a special graduation ceremonies for Native Americans, Blacks, Latinos, Asians, and LGBTQ students. And so there, the focus is, separating the graduation ceremonies around external factors and gender. In 2020, New York University moved to begin offering segregated dormitories for students who identify as Black, describing the new housing as a way of creating a safe space for students of color. Black student unions are common at many large universities, but in recent years, there have been white student unions formed in response. And a survey was done on 173 colleges and universities, and they found that 42% offer segregated residences. We're going backwards. 46% offer segregated orientation programs. We're going backwards. And 72% host segregated graduation ceremonies. We are going back to the Jim Crow era. And why? Why? We're going back because of critical race theory. Everything is about destroying power structures and becoming Marxist and doing away with the elite and the wealthy and class warfare. The focus is there. It's on external factors. And so therefore, it's increasing and spurring on more racial tension. Every time you turn on the news now or even look on social media, you see a picture of some black students beating up a white student, or some white students beating up black students, and everyone's fighting and everyone's angry and everyone has a grievance and everyone has a chip on their shoulder. We were doing well in this country and moving forward prior to Barack Hussein Obama. President Obama really pushed a lot of these racial tensions and brought us to the place that we are today. And through President Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, many of these tactics are still being deployed throughout our nation.
I know it's a crazy thing. Is like I'm not that old. Like I'm 40. But I couldn't imagine when I was in college
Right.
an announcement that there were going to be segregated dormitories. Like I that just is baffling me because I couldn't even picture it.
Sure.
Like and the big push I remember when I was in seminary was the idea of multiracial churches. And we want to mix everybody together, and we want whites and blacks and Hispanics and Asians, ministering together. So because of that, like when I was in seminary, I served in a historic African American church as a youth pastor. I served in a Korean church as a children's pastor. So I did both of those as my volunteer work while I was in seminary because I wanted to know how to relate to all these different races because we wanted to bring them all together. And it just seems like that's such a relic gone by. And it's just such a tragedy that we have lost what was great motivation in that direction. And you're right. I think it's all because of what critical race theory's done over the last 5 years.
Yeah, in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, Paul gives a clear depiction of the characteristics and the climate of the last days. one particular characteristic that he mentioned is that men will become false accusers. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
when you unpack that term false accuser, in the Greek it means diabolos. We know that term to mean devil or serpent.
Yeah.
So wherever there is a false accusation, there is the spirit of Satan, who is the father of lies and the deceiver and the one who creates discord amongst the brethren. And so we must know that critical race theory is a false accusation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Racism is not a skin tone or a color. Racism is sin. Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Sin, there is sin in general. Not only can whites choose to fall into the sin of racism, but blacks can as well. Not too long ago, I was in California driving, and the guy that picked me up was Hispanic, and he was talking about the racial tensions that he experiences there with other Hispanics from different parts of the country. And so racism is something that is not simply pinpointed upon whites. Racism is a choice. And I've come in contact with several white people who I'd never experienced racism from, although I've come in contact with some who I have. I've come in contact with several black people who I never experienced racism from. But then I've come in contact with several others who I have. Racism is a choice. It's not a skin tone. It's not something that's inherently ingrained into a specific people group. And that's where the diabolos comes from. That's where the serpent comes from that Paul is talking about when he references the false accusation.
Yeah, no, and racism is baked into critical race theory because
Yes, yes,
it is founded on Marxism,
yes,
and Karl Marx was a racist. Like, he was a
yes,
racist through and through toward
yes,
black people, and sort of the craziest thing is Marx, who was a Jew, his greatest racism was anti-Semitism against other Jews. Like, he
yes.
hated the Jewish people, couldn't stand them, and he was one of them. And he's, I think, the greatest example that you can just as easily be racist against the people in your own skin color as you are against anybody else. And Marx is probably the prime example. I mean, look at some of the stuff that he said about Jews. It was, I mean, you'd think the guy was trying out for the Antichrist. Um, and but he was Jewish, and so yeah, no, it's crazy. Yeah, no, so yeah, all the points you make in this book, like, you draw back to some of those original philosophies of critical race theory. It's all great stuff, and so I guess sort of the last question, wanted to end with this one because I think it ties together the concepts of this book, and that is, how is abortion a tool for racism or a tool for critical race theory? So how is abortion a tool in the hand for the racist or the critical race theorist?
Yes, well, when you assess where abortion clinics are located, nearly 78 to 80% of abortuaries are located in economically disadvantaged communities. They're located in communities where there's a high concentration of Black and Brown people. The message is this: we will subsidize you, we will support you in killing your future, killing your posterity. It came up recently that in California, they had a bill where they were pushing reparations. In particular, they've created a task force in California to work on providing reparations. I believe that they're going to provide nearly $300,000 to every person in California who were descendants of slaves. And in 2022, California passed a bill called Proposition 1, which was a bill that allowed babies to be killed and aborted all the way up to birth. And so here's the takeaway. In California, we will compensate you for the harsh treatment that we placed upon your ancestors if you're willing to abort your future.
Yeah.
That's
Oh
the
man.
that's the takeaway. You're right. We'll pay you for the slavery, but here, vote for this bill that's going to kill your future generation. And what are we doing? We've signed up for it. We bought the lie, hook, line, and sinker, and we're supporting things that are really detrimental to our upward mobility. It's our ultimate demise, the support of abortion. And so that's where the racism stems from, the intentional targeting of the Black community through the practice of the evil woman, Margaret Sanger.
Man, I did not. Oh man, tying those two bills in California together. Oh, I didn't think of that, and it is awful and it is terrible. No, it definitely you put them together and it's a payoff. You kill your babies, we'll pay you off, and then we'll keep you so small, population percentage wise, that we'll always be able to have you under our thumb.
And that is so true. And keep in mind that Gavin Newsom plans on running for election in 2024. And we all know that if he pushes this woke task force of reparations in California, then other states will get on the bandwagon. And so, therefore, more Blacks, more colored people, more Negroes, in the words of Margaret Sanger, will support the Democratic Party. And therefore, he gains support through political propaganda, and he dangles the carrot in front of us one more time as we buy into the big lie.
Yeah, and his other hand holds the butcher knife of abortion, ready to take them all out. Yeah.
That's it.
No, it's the carrot of reparations in one hand, the butcher knife of abortion in the other.
I like it. You'll hear that again.
Yeah. Man, I'm still reeling a little bit by you putting those two bills together. I did not see, like, I've heard them both in the news because they're, very newsworthy, but
Yes.
had not connected that together. But I think it's got to be. And I'm sad about it, like, because it's tragic. It's a way to kill people who are made in God's image, the way to stop more lives that would improve and benefit our society to have them there. But we're not going to get to experience them because they've been taken out of existence before they even had a shot.
So true.
So
And that's where the focus of, everyone has a role. We all have the role to
yeah.
speak up, whether it's the Black minister or the white minister. Um, during Hitler's Germany, a renowned pastor by the name of Martin Niemöller, he said these words. He said, "First they came for the communist, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist." He said, "Then they came for the socialist, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a socialist." He said, "Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't that either." He said, "Then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. And then ultimately they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me." We can't sing a little louder. We can't have a noisy church as we try to drown out the sounds of the mourning of babies and their blood that cries out from the ground. We must speak up. We must allow our voices to be heard. And it's time for the church to engage the public square.
Yeah, and so true. No, thank you so much, Pastor John. Thank you for this book, Erased. I am so glad that I read it. I would love for everybody who's watching this video to pick up a copy, get it yourself, and read it. I put it in the category of like must read for a pastor. Just those two chapters for Black ministers and white ministers. That advice I think is something that's so important. But this is a book for everybody. Like even the pastoral call chapters. I mean, it's calling us all to be a watchman, which is what you tell us to do. And that's what we need to do. We need to watch for what's going on. And obviously, being a watchman in the mold of Ezekiel, we got to speak up for what we see and we got to be active about it. And so, great book by Pastor John Amanchukwu. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I had a great time with this interview, and I hope it was a blessing for everybody that was here.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
And I want to say in closing, if you're new to Rev Reads, I would love for you to subscribe to the channel so you can be up to date with the newest book reviews that we have. I want to take books like Pastor John's and let you guys know about them. So subscribe so that you can learn more about the great books that are available and out today for you. And if you want to support the channel at all, you could go to buymeacoffee.com/Rev Reads, support the channel for as little as $3 a month. I'm giving away free books all the time, giving away a copy of Pastor John's book in the next day or two. So if you become a member now, you can get a chance to get on that drawing and the future ones that we have for that. So again, thank you so much. The book is Erased by John Amanchukwu. Thank you for your time on Rev Reads.